What's going on, guys? I'm CFB Kings, and welcome back to another episode of the CFBKings Show. Really appreciate you tuning in today. Hope you're doing well. Week 9 slate is one that could shake up the season and the college football landscape in a major way. There's a ton of great matchups coming up, including tonight if you're watching on Thursday. Tomorrow on Friday, there's 3 solid games, and Saturday's lineup is incredible, and we're going to be breaking it all down today. Let's get right into Syracuse at number 19 Pitt. This is one of the most intriguing matchups of the week, and it's also about to kick off in a little bit if you're watching right after this is uploaded. But 5-1 Syracuse at number 19, 6-0 Pittsburgh. Both teams are coming off bye weeks. The Panthers are a 6-point favorite. The over-under is 62.5, giving us an implied score of 34-28 Pitt. This is a battle between two of the most underrated teams and quarterbacks in the country, in my opinion. Syracuse quarterback Kyle McCord is currently second in the FBS in passing yards per game. He's averaging 360 passing yards per game. The only player ahead of him is Cam Ward, who is tied for first with Ashton Genty in current Heisman odds. But then we have Pitt quarterback Eli Holstein, who's averaging 283 per game. That's 13th in the FBS, right next to Carson Beck and ahead of Curtis Rourke, who's at Indiana. But he's accounted for 1,966 total yards and 18 touchdowns so far this year, and he is a redshirt freshman. He was at Alabama last year and redshirted. He was behind Milroe and Ty Simpson, I believe, and I think Tyler Buckner was on that roster as well. But he redshirted for a season at Alabama, so these 6 games so far this season are his first real action that he's seen in college, and he's been phenomenal. Pitt has a top 10 offense in points per game heading into this week. They're averaging 40.8 points per game, and this battle between Pitt's offense and Syracuse defense is going to be an interesting one. Syracuse's defense has struggled at points this season, but overall they've been pretty solid, especially in their one other game against an elite offense like the one that Pitt has, and that was when they played UNLV, who's currently 5th in the FBS in points per game, averaging 45 points per game. So that was 3 weeks ago, I believe, 2 games ago for them because they had the bye week last week. They beat the number 25 Rebels 44-41, and they have some experience at least facing one of these high-powered offenses. And one big thing about that score, 44-41, you might be thinking that's not a very impressive performance at all, but those 41 points are pretty deceptive in terms of how well Syracuse's defense actually played. UNLV had a blocked punt returned for a touchdown, and then they had another punt where they almost blocked it, so the Syracuse punter just pulled the ball back and got tackled at the 9-yard line, and then UNLV scored on the next play. So those are really 2 touchdowns that the Syracuse defense wasn't responsible for, and then there was also the field goal in overtime where had those special teams touchdowns not come, they wouldn't have even gone to overtime. So basically Syracuse's defense allowed 24 points in regulation to a top 5 offense in the country if you really break it down. So against an offense that averages just under 45 points per game, Syracuse's defense really held up well. And now tonight we'll see if they can replicate some of those results against another high-powered offense and a major challenge from Eli Holstein and Pitt. This game has major implications for the ACC race. These teams are currently 4th and 5th in ACC standings. Pitt's undefeated, 0 losses overall and 0 losses in conference play. And then Syracuse has just the 1 loss to Stanford. So this one will play a major role in determining how things look at the end of the regular season. The biggest key to this game will be how Pitt plays in the first half. All season long, the Panthers have gotten into these early deficits against West Virginia and Cincinnati. They trailed North Carolina at the end of the first quarter. Cal scored first in that game 2 weeks ago. And now they've been able to overcome all those and pull out the win every time. But a big point of concern for them this week is that Kyle McCord and LaQuinn Allen and that Syracuse offense, if Syracuse gets out to an early lead, that's not a team who will be easy to mount a comeback on in the second half. Pitt came back from down 10 in the fourth quarter to beat West Virginia. They came back from down 21 to beat Cincinnati, but I don't think they'd be able to pull that off if they found themselves in a similar situation against Syracuse. Prediction-wise, I think this will be a really close game. I think this will be one that goes down to the final minutes, just like several games have for both teams so far this year, but I do lean toward Pitt, especially with them having the home environment. They have found ways to win every week despite some very dire circumstances at points, and if they can keep the crowd in it, if they can get out to a quick start, not get into one of those deficits early, I think they'll be able to get the job done again this week. If Syracuse does win this one, however, watch out for the Orange to be an ACC and college football playoff contender, because they've been missing their best player on defense since week 1. And if they're able to improve to 6-1 with a ranked road win over an undefeated conference opponent, they're going to be ranked in the AP Top 25 next week. They're going to keep moving up. And when they get Marlo Wax back, their best linebacker and just best overall player on defense, they're going to be a major threat. Number 12 Notre Dame travels to East Rutherford, New Jersey for a neutral site matchup with number 24 Navy. This is one of the most interesting matchups of the season, just in terms of finally getting to see Navy play an elite opponent, a high-quality opponent, and everything that's on the line for both teams regarding their college football playoff chances. Notre Dame is a 13-point favorite. The over-under is 52.5, giving us an implied score of 33-20 Irish. The public is very split on this line because the total picks on this game, just on the point spread, is 53% Notre Dame and 47% Navy. So almost right down the middle, slight edge to Notre Dame, but the total money is 56% on Notre Dame and 44% on Navy. So it's really, really very split right now, and there are a lot of people believing in this Navy team. I've mentioned it a few times, but Navy has played literally one of the worst schedules in the country. They've played the 132nd ranked schedule out of 134. The only two worst are Army and Liberty, and it's been a fun story most of the year, but we finally get to see what Navy's actually made of. The Midshipmen have the fourth best offense in the FBS, averaging 44.8 points per game, and with that poor strength of schedule, they've done exactly what a good team should do to that type of schedule. They're averaging a 25-point win, 44.8 scored per game, 19.7 allowed per game. They're averaging winning by 25 points. This game pairs the fourth best offense in the country at Navy with the fifth best defense in the country at Notre Dame, who allows just 11.9 points per game. Navy's coming off a 51-17 victory over Charlotte, and Notre Dame just beat a pretty hobbled Georgia Tech team 31-13. The key to this matchup will be how creative Navy can get on offense to keep the Irish defense off balance. This offense, of course, runs through quarterback Blake Horvath, who has accounted for 621 rushing yards and 10 rushing touchdowns, then 888 passing yards and 10 passing touchdowns. He has been a dual threat in the most sincere meaning of that term, with 1,509 total yards and 20 total touchdowns through 6 games. Against their toughest opponent so far, earlier this year in Memphis, who I believe is 6-1, Blake Horvath had 12 carries for 211 yards and 4 touchdowns, then 192 yards passing and 2 touchdowns as well. If the Midshipmen can dial up a similar game plan, a balanced attack that can keep the Irish guessing on what Horvath's going to do, I think they'll have a real shot. Prediction-wise, I think Navy's a great team, and I think it would be awesome if they won this game and made a situation later on in the year where the AAC championship game, potentially with Army, could have a college football playoff spot on the line. However, similar to Texas against Georgia last week, I think the lack of really elite competition is going to hurt Navy. I think Notre Dame, having played Texas A&M at Kyle Field, having faced Louisville, having gone down to Atlanta to face Georgia Tech, they've been tested more, they've been challenged more, and I think that experience will play a key role in the Irish winning this game. I'll take Notre Dame to win it, but I do believe that Navy can keep it within that 13-point spread. Number 8 LSU travels to number 14 Texas A&M on Saturday. Texas A&M is a 2.5-point favorite, which is usually right around what's allotted for home field advantage. So Vegas is saying that these two are about even on a neutral field, but with the game being played at Kyle Field, there's a slight edge for the Aggies. The over-under is 53.5, implied score of 28-26, Texas A&M. This game pairs the last 2 unbeaten teams in SEC play, and therefore the teams tied for first in the SEC standings. So a ton on the line, obviously, for a shot to get to Atlanta for the SEC championship, and then the subsequent college football playoff implications. Texas A&M is the team that I've probably had the best read on this year in predictions on the show. I predicted a competitive, close loss to Notre Dame in Week 1, got it, and felt pretty confident in them beating Missouri when the Aggies were number 25, and Missouri was number 9, and got that one too. They beat the Tigers by 31. So things have worked out wonderfully for the Aggies in terms of how their schedule was set up this year, because their 4 biggest games are all at home. They got, at the time of the game, number 7 Notre Dame at home, number 9 Missouri at home, and now number 8 LSU at home. And their only ranked opponent left after this week is number 5 Texas, who they again get at home. So Kyle Field, especially at night, is always a phenomenal environment, and I think it'll play a big part in this game. LSU and Texas A&M have one common opponent so far this year, and that's Arkansas. LSU beat the Razorbacks 34-10 on the road in Fayetteville last week, and Texas A&M beat them 21-17 in Arlington, Texas. LSU outgained Arkansas by 115 yards, and Texas A&M was actually outgained by Arkansas by 82 yards in that game. So common opponent and transitive property stuff isn't the best indicator, obviously, and a lot of those results can just be attributed to matchups and how teams can be up or down from week to week, but it is interesting to see how they both fared against the Razorbacks, and LSU completely dominated them on the road at Arkansas, and Texas A&M trailed for almost that entire game at a neutral site in Texas. Prediction-wise, despite that common opponent discrepancy, I am leaning toward Texas A&M, primarily because, frankly, I'm not sold on either team, but at least the Aggies had the truly convincing win over Missouri. LSU's had some seriously close calls, with the outright loss to USC, obviously, then the debatable pick sixes called back against South Carolina, and going back to USC, that team has 4 losses now, so they have a lot. Their only loss is to a team with 4 losses, and USC just lost to Maryland last week. But yeah, then the pick sixes against South Carolina. The Ole Miss game was odd too last week, with LSU benefiting from an overturned fumble in the fourth quarter that would have given the ball to Ole Miss at the LSU 19-yard line. And then LSU also needed to convert 2 fourth downs on their game-tying drives. So I'm not super confident in either of them, but with the game being at Kyle Field in that environment and the fact that it's just not at Tiger Stadium, I think the Aggies will get it done on Saturday night. On Friday night, we have a massive showdown in the Mountain West and a game that'll play a huge role in determining the Group of Five's auto bid to the college football playoff. Ashton Jeanty and the number 17 Boise State Broncos travel to Las Vegas to take on the 6-1 UNLV Rebels. Boise State is a 3-point favorite. The over-under is 65.5. Implied score of 34-31 Boise State. This game will kick off at 10:30 p.m. Eastern on the CBS Sports Network, and it's a matchup of last year's Mountain West Championship, which Boise State ended up winning. Boise State's only loss is by 3 to current number 1 Oregon. UNLV's only loss is by 3 to Syracuse, and both teams have really dominated some of their conference opponents lately. Boise State's coming off a bye week, so they'll be rested up, and UNLV just beat Oregon State 33-25 last Saturday. This matchup is enormous, not only for the Mountain West race, obviously, but potentially for Army and Navy, or Memphis or Tulane, or whoever ends up representing the AAC, and any other Group of 5 contender, even though it does look like it's going to be either the AAC champ or the Mountain West champ as that G5 auto bid. But this game could also heavily impact Washington State, too, and I'll talk about them in a minute. Boise State and UNLV are number 1 and number 3 right now from the Group of 5 in percent chance to make the college football playoff, with Boise at 45.9% and UNLV at 16.8%. But those two percentages could basically flip-flop if UNLV won this game. And then Army's in between them at 25.2. So a ton on the line in terms of the Mountain West Conference Championship and then the CFP race that could impact multiple other teams. This matchup features the number 3 and number 5 offenses in points per game, and it'll be fun to watch if either can contain the other's offensive attack. This is also a big stage for Jeanty against a quality opponent in a TV slot where there's basically nothing else on, a massive spot for him to gain some more recognition and increase his odds of being that Heisman Trophy winner. For some reason, every time I've looked at this game lately, I've just felt like UNLV might get it done. UNLV's having one of their best seasons in program history, and a lot of the attention's gone to Boise State, and it's gone to Army and Navy, and those three have really dominated the headlines in the Group of 5. And UNLV had the spotlight for a minute. They got up into the top 25, but then they were immediately knocked out by Syracuse. So they've taken a back seat over the past couple weeks to everybody talking about Army, Navy, and Boise State. But this is a team that really deserves a lot of respect and one that shouldn't be doubted. One of the biggest reasons that I'm leaning UNLV in this game is that a lot of Boise State's wins, even though all of them are by double digits, have been pretty deceptive. For example, they beat Georgia Southern 56-45 by 11. They actually trailed 37-36 in the fourth quarter. They beat Washington State 45-24. That game was 24-17 right at the beginning of the fourth quarter. They beat Hawaii 28-7. That was 13-7 going into the fourth quarter. They've frequently had these explosive fourth quarters where they pull away, but against a team with UNLV's firepower, like we were talking about earlier, they have the 5th best offense in the country. Against a team like that who can match Boise State's scoring and who might be able to contain Genty a little bit better than some of these other teams, that's going to be a lot harder to do, to just put up 14 or 21 points in the fourth quarter. UNLV's special teams has been phenomenal lately. Like I mentioned earlier, they had a blocked punt return for a touchdown against Syracuse, and then another play that might as well have been a blocked punt because they just tackled the punter. And then they had a blocked punt return for a touchdown against Fresno State as well. They have just been awesome lately. Hajj Malik Williams, since taking over at quarterback, has been great. I think the defense will force a critical turnover, and I'll roll with the Rebels to beat the Broncos. All right, real quick, I wanted to talk about Washington State. I hinted at it a minute ago, but the Cougars sort of need to be the biggest Boise State fans in the country on Friday night, because a lot of people might be surprised to hear this, but Washington State is actually very quietly still a contender for an at-large bid to the college football playoff. Despite their conference situation in the Pac-2 and their inability to be able to win a conference title and get one of those auto bids, there's actually a solid chance that Washington State could be in the college football playoff discussion for one of those at-large spots. They are currently ranked number 26, and they're the first team in the receiving votes section, so the team right behind number 25. They just don't get the number next to their name, but this is actually the second time that they've been ranked number 26 this year. They were 26 when they lost to Boise State, so they just can't quite get into the top 25 yet, but maybe this week. According to ESPN Analytics, they have a 39.4% chance to win out. That is the second highest of any team behind only Notre Dame. Their only loss, like I mentioned, is on the road to current number 17 Boise State, and Boise staying ranked and being that group of 5 bid would help make the Cougars' resume look a bit better. The key, though, to Washington State getting into the college football playoff conversation is their 37-16 victory over Texas Tech. The Red Raiders are currently 5-2, 4th in the Big 12 standings, and are heavily in the mix to get to that Big 12 championship. If Texas Tech does end up being a player for that Big 12 title, and them winning it would do wonders for Washington State, but if Texas Tech gets ranked and becomes a contender for that Big 12 auto bid, and Boise State ends up being the group of 5's bid, and then Washington State's sitting there at 11-1 with their only loss to Boise State coming like 9 weeks before Selection Sunday, and they have a win over one of the better teams in the Big 12, if you combine all of those things, with them being currently ranked number 26, and who knows where the College Football Playoff Committee would have them, but they're almost into the discussion already as one of the ranked teams. But if you combine all those things together, the Cougars would have a great chance of backdooring their way into one of those last couple seeds. All right, a couple rapid-fire previews here. Number 20, Illinois, travels to number 1, Oregon. The Ducks are a 21.5 point favorite. The over-under is 54.5. Implied score of 38-17, Oregon. I shared this on Twitter and Instagram earlier this week, but the last time Oregon was number 1 was in 2012. They reached AP number 1, and then immediately the next week lost at home to a ranked opponent. Additionally, the last time Illinois faced an AP number 1 team was in 2007, where they went on the road to number 1 Ohio State and beat them. We'll see if history repeats itself on Saturday. Number 21 Missouri travels to Tuscaloosa to take on number 15 Alabama at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on ABC on Saturday. Alabama is a 13.5 point favorite. The over-under is 53.5. Implied score of 34-20, Crimson Tide. This game is an interesting one because for both teams, it is a must-win game for them to have any college football playoff hopes. And they're both kind of already on the edge, flirting with not getting in. But they both have struggled heavily over the past few weeks and are trying to regain some of that momentum that they had early on in the year. And this is a huge game for Kalen DeBoer specifically because as harsh as it has been already for him in Tuscaloosa, losing this game to fall to 5-3 would make things extremely uncomfortable there. This is also a chance for Eli Drinkwitz and Missouri to prove themselves, but that's going to be a tall task because they will likely be without starting quarterback Brady Cook and running back Nate Noel, according to ESPN's Pete Thamels. So I've been pretty vocal on social media and especially in the last episode, but I don't believe Missouri should be ranked. They got destroyed by the only currently ranked team they've played. They struggled with BC, who has 3 losses and who just lost by 21 to Virginia Tech. They struggled with 2-5 Auburn. They just haven't been impressive. But a win on the road in Tuscaloosa would do a lot for their resume and just the perception of that team and that program, especially if they do it with a hobbled roster. I do think Alabama's going to win this game, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was slightly closer than that 13.5 point spread. If, maybe it's a 17-point game, Missouri tacks on a late touchdown or something like that, or maybe it's a 6-point game and Alabama pulls away to make it 13. I can definitely see this one being close. Alabama has played close game after close game after close game for the past 4 weeks. I think they've all been decided by one possession, but Missouri had the close call with Auburn, 3-point win over Vandy. They've all just played pretty tight games, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if this one was within 2 touchdowns. Number 11 BYU travels down to Orlando, Florida to take on UCF on Saturday, and this is certainly one of the most interesting lines you'll see all season. But the 3-4 Knights are favored to beat the 7-0 number 11 BYU Cougars. UCF is a 2-point favorite. The total is 55.5. Implied score of 29-27 UCF. If you missed these teams' respective games last week, BYU escaped a scare from Oklahoma State. The Cougars beat the Cowboys 38-35, and Oklahoma State is now 0-4 in conference play. And then UCF came extremely close to knocking off number 9 Iowa State, but they lost by the same score actually as BYU's game, 38-35. So if you're curious about that line, a lot of this is analytical stuff, obviously, and just matchups, of course, but BYU almost lost to a team who's winless in conference play at home, and UCF nearly beat a top 10 team last week. So now the Knights get another shot against a team tied for first in Big 12 standings. Number 5 Texas heads over to Nashville to face the ranked Vanderbilt Commodores. Number 25 Vanderbilt, I mentioned it in the last episode, but I have no clue how they're ranked, but a pretty cool accomplishment for that program. Texas is an 18.5 point favorite. The total is 53.5. Implied score of 36-18 Longhorns. This is a very intriguing bounce back spot here for Texas to see if they can kind of shake off that loss to Georgia, get back on track, earn a ranked win actually. But we'll see if Diego Pavia can pull off some of that magic that they had a couple weeks ago against Alabama, and we'll see if the Commodores can keep it rolling. A couple other games just to put on the radar. Louisville travels to Boston College on Friday night. Solid matchup with some ACC standings implications. Washington travels to number 13 Indiana. That's actually where College Game Day is. The Hoosiers are hosting their first ever Saturday morning College Game Day. They hosted one on a Thursday night in week 1 of 2017, I want to say. But they get their first ever real Saturday morning College Game Day. But they will be without starting quarterback Curtis Rourke for the game. So the Huskies are just a 6.5 point underdog. Could be a pretty interesting one there. Number 3 Penn State is just a 6.5 point favorite at Wisconsin. Very similar upset potential there to Indiana and Washington. But the Badgers are 5-2 if you haven't been keeping up with them. They got their doors blown off by Alabama in week 2 or 3, and I think that was 42-10. And I feel like they've just been almost entirely forgotten about since that game. They lost to USC. I think that was their other one by, I want to say 17. But those are their only 2 losses. They're 5-2. They're a touchdown underdog to a top 3 team. They lost their quarterback for the year, but the backup, Braden Locke's been playing pretty good. And they get Penn State at home at night. And there's some serious upset potential there in Madison. All right, let's get into Week 9's picks. We did good last week, 8-4, hit at a nice 66.7%. We'll take that every week. 8-4 in Week 8 brings the overall record to 45-25, 64.3% on the season. I wanted to preface as usual by saying that if you don't wager any cash on these games, just keep it that way. If you do, make sure you're being smart about it. Stay within your limits. Don't believe most of what you see on commercials or social media because a ton of that is fake and all that sort of stuff. But if you don't do it yourself but like the concept of it or just find the premise entertaining, definitely stick around for a few minutes. And if you don't want to hear about it at all, feel free to check out now. First up, we have Western Michigan's team total over 39.5 points versus Kent State. The Golden Flashes at Kent State are searching for their first win. They are 0-7, and their struggles are primarily on defense. And by struggles, I mean they are 134th out of 134 teams in the FBS in points per game allowed. they are dead last, allowing 45.9 points per game. Against FBS opponents this season, Kent State has allowed 55, 71, 56, 52, 37, and 27. Western Michigan's been hot lately. In their last 3 games, they've scored 45, 34, and 48, and I think they'll get into the 40s against Kent State on Saturday. Keeping it in the team total category, I have Illinois' team total under 16.5 points against number 1 Oregon. That Ducks defense has been sharp lately, and combined with Illinois just not having the most high-powered offense to begin with, I can see Illinois scoring 13 or 14, maybe 2 touchdowns or a touchdown and 2 field goals. A touchdown and 3 field goals would still have us under the mark. But yeah, I think this will just be a relatively low-scoring game, and I think Illinois will finish with under 16.5, under 17 points. I have BYU straight up. BYU moneyline against UCF. I mentioned it earlier, but UCF is actually favored to beat BYU, number 11 BYU on Saturday. But the Cougars have just found ways to win games, and even last week when the ESPN win probability indicator gave them a 0.8% chance, 0.8 in the final minute against Oklahoma State, they found a way to win anyway. They fended off a late rally from Baylor to win by 6. They absolutely stole one away from SMU by 3, and I think they get it done on the road again over UCF. I also have Washington quarterback Will Rogers over 233.5 passing yards at number 13 Indiana. He's gone over 233 in 5 of their 7 games this year, and so far this season, the offenses that Indiana's defense have faced are ranked 96th, 124th, 102nd, 65th, 119th, and 89th. Now, Washington's offense as a whole isn't much better than most of those, but Will Rogers himself is going to be one of the best quarterbacks that Indiana's faced all season and probably will face all year. And he's in the top 25 in the FBS in passing yards per game, and the only other top 25 quarterback that Indiana faced so far was Maryland's Billy Edwards, and he threw for 289. Another reason I like this number, especially in this game, is because without Curtis Rourke, Indiana's offense might not be quite as efficient as it has been, and they might be punting the ball back to Washington to give Rodgers just a couple more drives with it to get over that 233 mark. And lastly, I have Miami minus 20.5 over Florida State. I want to draw your attention to a quote from Miami's head coach Mario Cristobal just a couple years ago. In 2022, Miami lost to Florida State 45-3. They lost by 42 points at home to the Seminoles. And after that game, Cristobal said, "We're going to remember this one because there's going to be a time where the tables turn and it's going to be our turn." Yep, I'm going to roll with Miami minus 20.5 over Florida State. That's going to wrap up this episode of the show. Really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. Week 9 slate is a fun one, and I'm really looking forward to having great games tonight if you're watching on Thursday. An awesome Group of 5 matchup on Friday between Boise State and UNLV, and then a loaded Saturday as well. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, or follow if you're listening on Spotify, and make sure to follow at CFBKings on Twitter and Instagram for all things college football. Thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and take care.